session with Dr. Sally Uren, a powerhouse in the world of sustainability and chief executive of Forum for the Future. With 2 decades of experience under her belt, Sally is on a mission to drive systemic change toward a just and regenerative future where both people and the planet not only coexist, but thrive. Sally has led Forum from its initial UK roots to a global force with thriving programs across the US, Southeast Asia, and India, uniting voices and strategies that are reshaping how we think about, produce, and value essentials like food and energy. Sally's laser focus is on redefining the role of business in society, challenging companies across sectors to adopt regenerative practices and prioritize purpose alongside profit. She's a trusted advisor to top-tier brands like Target, Olam, Marks & Spencer, and Bentley Motors, bringing her environmental science background and visionary thinking to help them and others reimagine their impact. As a frequent speaker at leading sustainability conferences and a respected media contributor, Sally has a gift for transforming complex global challenges into calls for action that inspire real change. Honored with an OBE for her services to sustainable business, she's as passionate about reimagining our future as she is effective in steering us toward it. Let's dive now into a conversation with Dr. Sally Uren to uncover how we can each contribute to a future that regenerates and restores. Welcome, Sally.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So, talking about regeneration, is that really a true possibility?
Absolutely, it is. Right at the start of my career, I was involved in a project to essentially clean up the Manchester Ship Canal and clean up then what was called the Salford Docks. And this was a really polluted waterway, really as consequence of the Industrial Revolution. And over the course of just 6 months, we were able to clean the water and introduce salmon into the quays, as they're now known. And throughout my early career, I really saw that regeneration was both desirable, but was completely possible.
So you put the thought and the talk about it into action. And was that inspired when you were doing your PhD in environmental science?
Yeah, I mean, so the Manchester story was before my PhD and actually really propelled me onto a PhD, partly because at the age of 21, I had no idea what I wanted to do. So I thought best to carry on with this pursuit of environmental science. And yeah, my PhD was looking at how we can protect ecosystems. And then that led me to the rainforest of Borneo after my PhD, where I was involved in a project to regenerate logged over rainforests. And going back to the site actually in 2019, just before the pandemic, it's just so rewarding to see actually a lot of the seedlings that I helped plant are now big strapping trees, and areas of logged over land have completely regenerated.
And in a number of how many years? So
Uh,
like 20 years. So these were aha moments. You saw that regeneration is a reality.
Completely, yes. And, you know, we're all living systems, and nature is the biggest living system of them all. And regeneration is a fundamental part of nature. It's how we're wired.
So when you see those realities, and then through your career, you eventually joined Forum for the Future, well, almost 2 decades ago, right?
Yes.
What was the initial purpose of that creation?
But Forum was established because back in 1996, I think it was, um, there were campaigning nonprofits, really quite rightly raising issues that businesses in particular needed to pay attention to. And there were non-campaigning nonprofits, but not so much in sustainability. And actually, the guy that set up Forum, called Jonathan Porritt, really saw that actually there was a need for a non-profit independent organization to work particularly with business once the issue had been raised, to kind of work with them to deal with the issue. So we were established to act as what we call a critical friend. So we have long-term relationships with many, many, many businesses around the world. We work with them one-to-one. More often, they're involved in our collaborations. But we were really established to work in partnership with business to accelerate their action on these agendas.
And when you started, or when Forum for the Future was started, it originally began in the UK, but eventually you've obviously clearly branched out to Asia, India, and beyond.
Yes. So when I joined Forum, my job was to establish our work with the private sector, and our head office was in a place called Cheltenham. It wasn't even in London. And most of our work was actually with the public sector, so with local councils, local authorities. And we very quickly built up the work with business, but then it became clear we were working with multinationals. And, the UK is a very, very small part of the global picture. And it became really clear that if we were going to drive impact at scale, we needed to work outside of the UK, which is when we started to then think about how that might happen.
So, when it comes to making change and making it effective, is it really necessary to weave in all the elements? You're talking about businesses, governments, civil society. So, it seems to need a whole element rather than just one.
Yes. Yeah. A guiding principle for the work we do at Forum is this whole notion of systems change. So if we think about the challenges that we face today, from widening inequality through to loss of nature, through to the climate crisis. These are big, what we call systemic challenges. They are multifaceted. They have many different causes, and they're so big that one part of a system can't solve for them on their own. And in order to drive a systemic change, in order to stabilize our climate, to allow us to adapt to a changing climate, to reverse nature loss, to actually reverse social inequalities, then we need to take a systems approach, and we need government to do their bit. We need business to do their bit. We need civil society to do their bit, academia. The whole system needs to come together to affect that transformational change.
Do you think that that perhaps is why sometimes change hasn't happened when people talk about creating a sustainable economy, because maybe it's just policy, or perhaps it's just a business
Yes,
that effort?
there are two reasons why change hasn't happened probably at the scale and pace that we need. One is that it is hard, for sure. And often the work that I do, there is no roadmap. We're kind of making it up as we're going along. So there isn't a guide to how to affect transformational change in the global economy. So it's kind of, we're charting new territory. But secondarily, we need the system to come together. So one part of the system has got a very important role to play. So government's role is to create those enabling policies, but then businesses need to shift their practice and consumer behavior needs to shift. That's more complicated than incremental change or single issue change. And that's really why at Forum we advocate for a systems approach, which sounds really complicated and difficult, but actually it's about understanding root causes. It's about collaboration, and it's not as hard as it sounds.
Well, I mean, it relates to so many things in life, right? We say it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a team to make the win happen. It's about collaboration, and I think that translates across, all sorts of industries and parts of society. So if so our listeners can understand too, when you talk about, breaking it down and doing the systemic change, can you share with us an example, in one sector, perhaps in food or in energy, where you've seen it from the start to success?
Yes. Yeah. So if we think about the energy transition right now, so if we look at the supply of energy in the world today and look at particular countries, so in the UK now, renewable energy supplies more energy than oil and gas.
Wow.
How
Okay.
has that happened? It's happened through a number of things. So systemic change normally follows a sort of similar pattern. So you start with making the case for change. So we've known about the science around our climate now for 25 years? I mean, a long time. Scientists have been saying, hang on a minute, elevated carbon dioxide levels in our atmosphere, these are higher than we would expect. It's down to man-made emissions. And so you start with the case for change. So why do we need to make that change? But just making a case for change on its own doesn't change anything. What you actually need to do then is to also start to think about, well, what are the innovations that we need to change how we do things? And so if we take the energy transition, which we're right in the middle of right now, so we are on the cusp of, across the world, more renewable energy than energy fueled by fossil fuels. And it varies according to geography. But where we are right now is a function of, we made the case for change, but then we also invested in innovation. So we invested in renewable technology, and then the price of renewable energy became lower than the price of fossil fuels. So you've got that innovation scaling. But even the case for change and innovation scaling isn't enough, because you need people to do things differently. And so where we are right now is a function of policymakers beginning to understand that they have a role to play, the investor community understanding what's called the value at risk from climate. Really simple. If you've got a manufacturing facility in a low-lying area prone to flooding, it's going to become what's a stranded asset. So it's going to become unviable. And so the systemic change we're seeing in energy right now is a function of, someone made the case for change. We invested in innovative new technologies. They've scaled. We've now got enabling policy. We've got businesses willing to act because they can save money, they can become more efficient, more resilient. And investors are saying, actually, for long-term returns, I need to be investing in renewable energy. And then the final bit of the jigsaw is we've got people willing to switch their energy supply. We've got community groups buying community energy. We've got a sort of a broader societal shift that's happening. And so these are all the ingredients of systemic change. And we need all of them to come together, maybe sequentially, maybe at the same time. But really, just to sort of underscore this, we've seen lots of examples of where governments have introduced policies or tax regimes. They haven't affected any change because actually behavior change comes from a combination of other factors. So, in other words, different levers you pull for systemic change, but you have to pull them all and you have to keep pulling them. And the simplest example, actually, one of the earliest stories of systemic change is the electrification of Manhattan. So Edison is famous for the guy that invented the light bulb. Bear with me on this. It will make sense. So, he's down as the father of the light bulb. Actually, he wasn't the first person to invent the light bulb. What he did was he got the price point right for the light bulb, but then he showed proof of concept. So he electrified Wall Street. He said, look at what my light bulb can do. And then he went and influenced all the different burgers in Manhattan. And so through a combination of innovation, proof of concept, the right price point, collaboration, influencing, he electrified Manhattan. That's how systems change.
And that's an enormous project from start to finish, any one of the ones that you do. But here's where my question is, because at the end of the day, you can share the knowledge, you can get people to understand the changes necessary, but for the everyday person to get that consensus, it probably also affects their pocketbook. So what you were saying, the price point seems to be the ultra critical final element, because as much as someone might want to purchase sustainable products, if it costs triple the amount, they can't survive, right?
Correct.
In certain parts of society. So how do you blend that with wanting to do good, but reaching that price point people can afford?
So it's a really, really good question. And if we think about some of the common critiques to sustainability and the reasons why organizations are perhaps not moving as fast as they could, we hear, well, consumers won't pay for it. What I would say is they don't need to pay for it. We are now at the point where the more sustainable option actually is often cheaper to produce. It uses less raw material inputs. It creates less waste. And I think we've still got a bit of a hangover from the early days of sustainability where you had more sustainable products and price differentials were placed on those products because the early adopters would pay more. So people would pay more for organic veg and fruit, for example. But the
And when people,
reality is they shouldn't be.
but right. The thing is, the people who can afford it will. I mean, we all
Yeah,
understand,
so
but
that's no good for mainstreaming, right? And so where we are right now, we're shifting from the early adopters that will pay a price premium because they can afford it to actually mainstreaming sustainability in everyday goods and services. If we look at IKEA, for example, IKEA products are really affordable. They're also really sustainable. If we look at some of the low cost discount retailers, our Aldi's, the Lidl's, they've got really good sustainability policies. And so what we're seeing now is mainstreaming of sustainability into whole supply chains, whole product portfolios. And so there shouldn't be a premium. There doesn't need to be one.
so do you truly believe that can be achieved in different sectors? From, we're talking about food, furniture. What about fashion? People buy fast fashion because they just want something that's current, but yet it's a throwaway product, and that's the problem too.
These are all complex issues, aren't they? And back to systemic change, societal norms, behavior shift is part of that. So at the moment, it's completely normal to buy a t-shirt for $5, wear it once and throw it away. People may not even think twice about doing that. I would argue that the days of us being able to do that are becoming more limited. Costs of production are going up, and quite critically, raw material inputs are going up in price and are scarce. So at the moment, if we think about how our economy works, we don't tend to factor in the price of water, the price of nature, the price of carbon. We seriously in apparel don't pay people a living wage. But this is all changing. So these are all kind of cost externalities. They're now getting factored into the balance sheet. And so this is where, the political debate will be, well, sustainability is expensive. The price of everything's going to go up. not if we do it properly and not if we have the enabling government policy. So at the moment, a lot of taxation, a lot of legislation is benefiting kind of the industries of the past. And so this is why government right now has got such an important role to play through tax subsidies, tariffs, and so on. You can actually set the rules of the market so that the market moves towards sustainability. It's happening in Europe through the new legislation, through new tax regimes, and so on and so forth. And so this notion that we are going to have fast throwaway fashion forever is really flawed, because the raw material inputs are going to run out, the prices are going to go up, and we're going to need to take that fabric back and recycle it. And so we're just at this sort of tipping point, teetering over the edge of doing things differently. But it's so important to bring people along, because ultimately it is going to be behavior change. And that's also importantly where we need to shift the narrative of, this is expensive, this product is actually worse than your other product, and this, is really difficult, to actually, this is a great thing to do. I'm buying something that I know is better for me, is better for my family, is better for the planet. It's the same price. Oh, and all the things that I really get annoyed with, that packaging, and I don't know where to throw this away, that's all taken care of.
And it will
And that could
last.
happen.
Yeah. Well, I think of even certain industries where people, I think, have had a wake up call even in the last several years. For example, the droughts in Spain and the increase in olive oil, at least here in the US, it's tripled, sometimes even more than that. I think of another food product, vanilla extract, for example. There was a point where a 4-ounce bottle went up to like $25, and now it's dropped back down to 10. But obviously, the climate being affected in Madagascar and different areas there. So I think there is a common general knowledge that our climate is suffering and people want to do good. So this idea of systemic change, it appears to me that Forum has really nailed it on the head, is having to create a collaborative effort where everybody gets involved in that change. So that said, I'm curious to know a little bit more about the school portion of what Forum does, the School of System Change.
Yes.
Is that for anybody, or is it for particular businesses, or how
It's
does it?
for anybody that's interested in driving systemic change should take a look at the School of System Change. The origin of the school actually comes from a master's that we used to run in sustainable development. So when Forum began, we had worked with the public sector, and then we also had a master's in sustainable development, because when Forum was started 25 years ago, if you wanted to study sustainable development, there was nowhere to do it. And so we created this master's where we it was a year long, and you went to go and work with our partner organizations to understand what does being sustainable really look like. And then about a decade ago, we actually did a count, and there were something like 356 masters in sustainable development. We thought, hang on a minute, we've done our job, right? We need to think, well, what's the next wave of knowledge, of capacity that will help drive change? And it's systems change. And so that's where the school really came from. It was an evolution of a master's program. And the school is designed for any change maker in any part of our society or our economy. So business, philanthropy, civil society, government. There are a range of courses. There are open courses. There are bespoke courses. But it's really a way of understanding how to see the world around you as a set of systems, and then understand with that knowledge, how then can I drive and deliver transformational change? And it's now in its 7th year, I think. And it's just a really powerful way of taking this, what can be jargon and word soup of systemic change, into practically, what do I do?
And are these all in person or online courses?
They're a mix. So they started off in person, and then actually COVID was a really good moment to sort of evaluate that. So some in person, some online. We run them for the Americas time zone, and then for Asian time zones. We find it hard to run completely internationally, because when it's someone's evening, it's usually someone's breakfast time. And so, we do both.
So I'm curious, this is a world you've lived, breathed, and worked in for over 2 decades. It's sometimes, I think, that the more you learn, the more you realize how much more there is to do. So does it ever create for you a type of climate anxiety, or an anxiety of like, how are we going to get through this? I mean, how do you maintain your optimism through it?
That is a great question. I think the optimism comes from a very firm belief that anything really is possible. And very much our view at Forum is the future isn't written. If we think about our society today, our economy today, it's a function of decisions people made yesterday. So the decisions we make today will determine tomorrow. And so if we can equip, in particular, and this is the work we do at Forum, senior decision makers, individuals that have got influence and opportunity to shift things, to envisage a different future and to kind of equip them to make different decisions today, then we'll get a different future. And these, we call them bright spots, they're already here. There was a great quote from William Gibson, who was a US science fiction writer a long, long time ago. And this is a cause of huge hope and optimism for me. He wrote, "The future is here. It's all around us. It's just not evenly distributed." So the new business models that we need to see, the new products, the new services, they're already here. And they are. They're just at the edge of the system. And I see part of my role and Forum's role is to kind of steward these glimpses of the future, these bright spots into the mainstream. And then they will become the dominant version of our future, the future that we want.
And seeing each of those bright spots is probably quite motivating.
Yeah, I mean, so we have a partnership right now with the Earthshot Prize where, they've been established to run a competition for what we would call bright spots. And they've got so many. And we also have to remember that the mainstream press, it doesn't like good news. It doesn't. It's much happier with stories of doom, gloom. It's terrible. But actually, these bright spots are here, honestly, all around us. There are inspiring stories of community groups, of entrepreneurs, of even mainstream businesses doing some really exciting work. And particularly right now, as we're staring into huge volatility, huge political uncertainty, already devastating impacts of climate. It's
Floods.
awful. It's heartbreaking. And not to mention civil unrest and wars. It's tough. But we have to remember these bright spots are here and they're growing and they're amplifying and they're accelerating. And we need to harness them.
And do you think, obviously you're saying all elements are important for systemic change. We've got the economic constraints, we talked about that, understanding the restraints of our resources, but clearly, not to go too deep into it, but geopolitical factors are a big element. Whether, with our newly elected soon-to-be president in the U.S. and what's going on in the Middle East. And so these things kind of get in the way, right? Or can get in the way, but you've got to power through. Is that tough when it comes to the
Yeah,
government
I
side?
mean, on the one hand, it would be really easy at the moment to go, oh my God, it's just all too difficult. It's too difficult. Because it is difficult. Geopolitical tensions are at their highest that they've been since before the Second World War. And we all know how close we are to that fragile, it's not peace, the fragile sort of reality that exists in parts of the world could easily tip into something really quite catastrophic. And then you can spiral off into thinking that, yeah, we're all doomed. And that's no good at all, because that may well be a version of our future. But what we have to do is to focus on our own agency and our own influence. And people will often ask me, well, does what I do make a difference? And I will say, absolutely, it does, because we live in a world of nested systems. So what I do in my home has an impact on my local neighborhood, has an impact on my local community, has an impact on my region, has an impact on my country, has an impact on the world. And furthermore, people forget that agency that they have. Most people are buying goods and services every day, some more than others, but most people are lucky to have access to the basic goods and services they need. Are we using that dollar spend, that euro spend to its maximum impact? No, we're not. And so just taking ownership of our decisions, even in a cost of living crisis, really, really matters. So what we all do creates ripples, matters. What we can't do is say, we'll leave it to consumers to sort this, right? Back to we need everyone to act. But make no mistake, everything everybody does really matters.
So if a young person comes to you, which I've had some kids even ask me, even my own daughter, will there be enough water when I'm older? So that shows to me that the kids are being impacted. They're learning, they're hearing it. It's infiltrating their lives now. And there is some concern, obviously, too. What do you tell young people to remain positive when sometimes they feel like, oh, I'm just a kid. How can I make an impact?
Yeah, I mean, I have similar conversations with my children as well. I think the youth activation on this agenda is phenomenal, is just overwhelming. There's a whole cohort of young people that are mobilizing on this agenda. They're showing up at international political negotiations. They're being funded to do that. They're being coached how to do that. And at the same time, we know that young people entering the workforce really care about this agenda. So if you talk to a lot of employers, they will say that sustainability is a massive talent attractor and a massive talent retainer. So the youth voice and perspective is super important. Can we guarantee that there will be water? Can we guarantee a livable future? No, we absolutely can't. But again, even if you're a teenager, there is something that you can do. So we kind of need to hold the peril and the utter shocking nature of some of the facts that we have to deal with the possibility. And we're not good at sometimes doing that as humans. We're quite binary focus in how we wired. It starts with your left brain or your right brain. Actually, we're both brains. And so we need to step over these either or false choices to actually hold the possibility, hold the peril, and use that as a sort of galvanizing lightning rod to push forward and do what we need to do.
See, and therein lies your optimism. I love it. So, and I think that's an element that will carry through everything. And so, for everything we spoke about today, I really want to say thank you for sharing that. It truly seems the more cohesive, a systemic push for sustainable future, then you're showing that anything is possible. And that is fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. The world needs this optimism. Thank you for sharing with us today, Sally.
No problem. It's been my pleasure.